Hello and welcome to the Porter Pickups YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at installing humbuckers into a Les Paul here. So we've got a couple things we'll show you about this particular guitar, kind of the way that it arrived to us and what we need to do to it to get our pickups in there. We'll be putting a set of these raw nickel Anthem Pluses in it today, and at the end we'll show you how they sound. All right, so first things first, we're going to talk about some of the tools that we need for this particular job. So we've got a multimeter to test the pickups and any wiring connection issues we might have. We've got screwdrivers for putting back the control plates, putting in the pickups, things like that. Wire cutters, tweezers to make everything easy and not burn our hands. We've got some tape here just to hold some wires together in the cavity and try to make it as neat as possible. And depending on how the pickups are, these are particular ones are 4 conductors, so we will be following a 4 conductor wiring diagram as well as the guitar wiring diagram. For this will be the 50s style wiring for the Les Paul. And then when we're using 4 conductor, I really like these vice grip wire strippers. They're kind of like an automatic wire stripper. They're really easy to strip 4 conductor wire, even just a single kind of wire that you might use from the ground of the bridge or anything like that. So really highly recommend these. I think they are at Lowe's or Amazon, anywhere, but they are not very expensive and they work really well. So we'll actually show you those in action on these pickups as well. So a quick overview of the tools, and we'll talk a little bit about the soldering iron as well as we get into the job here. All right, so we're going to be talking about just a couple of the other tools for the job here, in addition to the other tools I mentioned. I like to use silver solder, better connections. Sometimes we'll use flux if we need to, not very often. Solder sucker, potentially, if you do have massive cleanup issues. And as well as if you're trying to put these into a guitar, maybe that was kind of butchered from a previous install or something like that, you may have to consider doing something like solder sucking, cleaning off the parts and things like that. So we're using digital solder iron here. These are kind of spendy depending on what your definition of spendy is. These are around 80 to 100 bucks, but they are well worth it. These digital ones are great. You can see the temperature right there. You've got to have an iron that's hot enough to do the job, and you really don't want to be staying on the parts that long anyways, but you want your solder to melt and make clean joints, things like that. So let's dive right into the job now. So once we're in this stage, we're kind of evaluating what we are up against at this point with the guitar. If you're just replacing the pickups, obviously then you're soldering them back to the old locations, and hopefully everything will just go smoothly for you. But in this case, we have a couple different things going on here that we have to be aware of before we even start the job. So we've got a pre-wired kit that the customer had bought and installed in here. Looks like he just mounted all the hardware and things like that. There's also a new switch with the wires going off the switch. So what we're going to have to do is determine which wire is which from the switch area, and then we're going to have to figure out the 50s wiring, obviously hooking it back up in the correct place right here. So we'll see what we're up against. Again, we're going to dive further into this project, but as you're working on something like this, make sure you have your diagram, make sure you know what you're trying to do, especially if you are doing something like this and overhauling and replacing the whole guts. You're going to have to make sure that everything goes back in the correct places. Okay, so perfect example of what I was talking about there. This was installed in the guitar, but our volume pots are over here and our tone pots are over here. So this actually needs to be pulled back out and rotated, if that makes sense, so our volumes are in the correct location. Right now the kit was placed in there backwards. So we'll go ahead and fix that, and then we'll start with the job. Okay, so we're back here on the top side of the guitar. Obviously this was installed backwards, so we've got to take the knobs off. Now sometimes you can get these knobs off by just doing a little wiggling side to side like this, and they'll come off. Sometimes they're a lot trickier, and especially if you got some lower profile knobs, got to figure out a way to get them off. They make some knob pullers and things like that. One kind of tip and trick that we've done here in the shop is actually take a grocery bag, take the handle, and you can stick it under there. And that way you can get under a couple really tight spots, wrap it around a couple times, and just use that to sort of rock it, and that'll pull those knobs right off for you. All right, so the knobs are off. We're going to use this nut driver from StewMac to go ahead and take off the pots and reposition everything. So once we got all that done, we will begin trying to diagnose which wires are going where, getting the new pickups installed in the rings and things like that. Okay, we're back here on the back side of the guitar. One of the things that we did notice about this is an Epiphone Les Paul. So sometimes the pot hole sizes are slightly different. So a USA spec pot is going to be a 3/8 shaft, and sometimes the import pots are just a little bit smaller than that. So you may have to be drilling these out. These look like they kind of got pushed in there pretty hard, so they're actually not coming out as easy as they could. So we're going to finish fishing this out, and then we'll go on. And like we said before, this is exactly the point about the evaluation phase. When you're up against this, or you're repairing a guitar, or you're modifying your own guitars, sometimes when you open it up, you never know what you're going to find. So we're going to just walk you through this because we found it during the video. Okay, so I went ahead and got the pickups into the appropriate pickup rings. In this case, we've got the slanted pickup rings. You can see we got the bigger one for the bridge. So on the bridge, the thicker side, the pull pieces are going to go back towards that. And on the neck, pull pieces are going to go up towards the skinnier end of that. If you have room in your cavity to let the screws hang out, that's totally fine. If not, you may have to cut those with bolt cutters. Some of the cavities in some guitars are a little bit smaller than others. And in this case, we're going to be following our 4-conductor wiring diagram for Porter pickups. If you're installing other companies' pickups, make sure that you're following that diagram. Obviously, it'll go a lot better. And one final thing we're going to do always before we do any install is we're going to check the pickups. So we're going to use the multimeter. We've got it set to the 20K setting here. And this particular one we have modified with alligator clips, so that way we can clamp it straight to the hot and to the ground. So on the 20K setting, we're just going to make sure that both these pickups work. And we actually tested them off camera, but here's how you do that. So in our case, red and bare is the ground, black is the hot. I'm going to set that up, and you can see we have a 9.2 there on the meter. So we know that works, and we just tested the bridge. One final thing we do, just to make our life easier at the end, is you can write those numbers down, and so that way you know when you put them in the cavity, you can retest resistance and know which one's the neck and bridge, because you're going to have 2 identical 4-conductor wires or braided wires going in there. But what we're going to do is, since we know that this one's the neck pickup, we're going to go ahead and just mark it with the silver Sharpie. That way we know when it comes into the cavity, that's the neck pickup, and we put it in the neck pickup spot. Very simple, but it will save you a lot of headache. All right, so we've got 3 wires coming in from the switch area. We've got to identify which one is going to which spot. So the longest wire's got some shrink wrap on it here, so it looks like that one is obviously with the length is going to go straight to the jack. So we know that one's kind of solidified there. If you can, this is a pre-wired kind of thing, so you kind of have to trace the wires a little bit, looking like kind of pulling on them and looking back through the cavity. It's a good idea to know that you have to have, again, like we did with the pickups before, is marking these locations just to save yourself some time later on. So ideally before this should be installed, but you can trace it back that way. And I'll put, similar to how we marked that other one, I'll just put some tape on that one, knowing that that is the neck pickup. So I'm tracing it back up over here to the switch cavity up at the top of the guitar, and this is the neck pickup. So as we prep these for soldering, these are pretty good lengths. I don't really want to trim them back all that much. We'll leave them kind of hanging just to make sure everything is correct. If for some reason we got that mixed up, then we can obviously switch that neck and bridge wires to make sure our switch is actually functioning correctly. So the biggest thing on this braided wire is getting it prepared by pushing it back. So you're just going to lightly hold on to the outsides there. And basically you're just going to kind of take that shield. Sometimes you can get it with just gripping onto it there, and then sometimes it takes a little bit longer. We're basically trying to get all the little braided parts separated from the inner wire there. So there we go, getting the camera focused for you. So that's what it should look like after it's pulled back. So the outer part is going to be our ground, the inner part is going to be the hot to the appropriate locations based on our diagram. So we'll go ahead and mount the pickups in there, and we will have a whole mess of wires in here, but we will start actually doing the soldering, getting everything ready to go. Okay, so we're back here at the cavity. We're going to try to keep everything nice and tight so we can show you kind of how to plan out where your wires go. We've got the neck wires marked. Again, we put the Sharpie on that, and then we mark this one. So we know those are going to go to the neck volume pot. Then we've also got the bridge wires here. So naturally that one may be a little bit longer because it's going to be the bridge pickup lead. So we'll probably trim a few of these to get them closer to the pots. We want to be able to route them in a way that's nice and neat. It is a good idea to leave some extra room in case for some reason you mismark something and you need to flip-flop one of the locations. That's a good idea. If you got a pre-wired kit, or if you're not sure how to hook everything back up, it's a good idea to take a picture of what it looked like before, and then when you replace the new pickups, obviously you can, put it back in the old spot. Or if you need to get diagrams or stuff online, today we're going to be doing 50s style wiring, and we're just going to follow that because this is a 50s style kit. So the nice thing about some of these kits is that they leave you room to add the different wires to, in this case, it looks like they put some solder on here, so it's going to make it a little easier soldering the metal braided wire to the back of those. And let's see what else they got here. Yeah, they left some room where the capacitor attaches to each volume pot, so they left some room to put the hot inner wire in there, which is very convenient. It's very, it saves a lot of time trying to get each of those wires put in place. So let's take a look at something else I noticed as we're... Okay, so we mentioned that we were just going for this and that we would talk about anything that came up. So, of course, as we try to make this convenient and set everything up, something else did come up that we noticed, and this is a big something. So I got the camera repositioned here. You can see down in the corner there's a little hole. And inside that hole is just a little bit of a wire sticking out. So that actually is the bridge ground. So when the old electronics was removed, that was cut, unfortunately. Thankfully, we can still see a little bit of that wire. But what we're going to have to do is create some sort of little jumper, actually, to take from the existing wire that's in there and actually run it to one of the grounds of the pots. And so typically, when you're removing stuff, you should leave that ground wire. Leave the full length of that ground wire. I'm thankful that we still have a little bit left that we can actually chase down and kind of make a little pseudo jumper. I don't really like to do that, but in this case, we don't have any other choice in order to get the whole bridge and strings grounded themselves. So I'll throw that jumper in there, and then we will get on to the install. All right, so over here we've got the jumper wire installed. You can see, trying to get the camera to focus here for you. Right over there, we connected that ground wire straight to the pot here, so you can see kind of that little connection here. Again, hopefully you don't have to deal with that, but just something to watch out for as you go forward. All right, so here we are back at the cavity. We are finally ready to go ahead and start doing the install. Again, like we talked about before, just trying to group the wires into each pot location and figure out the best routes and how long and how short to keep the wires. Keeping in mind, obviously, that we don't have a lot of extra length sometimes, so it's better to leave more than you think you might need. And as you get better at the installs, you can start trimming it back to being a really tight and exact fit. But it's a good idea to, again, just keep that extra bit of wire there. I like to typically do the jack last. So the jack wire is kind of here. Just kind of pull it a little bit out of the way. If you're working on a brand new guitar, or even if you're working on a guitar that's in pretty good shape, regardless, it's a good idea to put some kind of protective materials around here, whether you can do some papers like this, just kind of lay them squarely around your cavity so you're really only focused on that. If you get any solder drips or anything crazy that comes out, it's not going to hit the finish. Obviously, it can cause a lot of trouble. Just be careful with some different finishes. If you're putting tape on them, you can actually lift off the edges, things like that. So try to find the best option, which may actually be something like taking your control plate and putting on a piece of paper, tracing it out, cutting it, and sort of making a template that just kind of falls over the whole area just to give you some extra, or cardboard or something like that. Always good idea to be cautious. We're going to stay pretty nice and tight, and I'm not going to do anything with the paper just so we can show you guys kind of really in as much detail as we can with the camera angles just kind of how everything will work. So let's get on to focusing on, we're going to focus on the neck pickup pot first and get those wires installed, and then we'll move to the bridge pot and then finally the jack at the end. All right, so here we are at the neck pot. As you can see, some solder was left here. This is a good example of what it might look like when you're putting in pickups in a guitar that already existed. Some companies will leave some solder there for you, which can be a little convenient, obviously, to get it all installed. I do like to take the rest of the wires, pull them back that I'm not going to be working on at the moment, and you can even just kind of tape them up as a bundle. I'm kind of off camera here, but taping those away so I'm not even really thinking about those specific wires. So I know that I previously marked this first wire here with the tape. Now in this typical setup with doing the 50s wiring and we have a 4-conductor pickup, we're not going to be using 2 of the wires on the pickup. So in the case of this is our color codes here for Porter pickups. We've got black is our hot, red and bare is our ground, and the green and white is the finish of each coil. And that's taped off for like a coil splitting application with a push-pull pot or something like that. So we know we're not going to use that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to tape that and protect that connection so it doesn't come in contact with the back of the pot, which we grounded out. So I'll put just a little bit of small pickup tape on that and get it ready to go. Some of these are very time-consuming little jobs. One way I like to do the 4-conductor here, and I'm kind of looking over at the screen just to make sure that you guys can see kind of what I'm looking at. The camera is auto-focusing quite a bit here, but hopefully this will provide you with an idea of the one way you can tape it off here. So I've got just a little pickup tape, or you can use any kind of tape. Just tape it off, make sure that solder joint does not come in contact with anything else. Looking at the way that this is set up here, I know I'm going to be running this one from the pickups into the same lug that the pot is going. So the black is hot here on our color codes. And then I know I'm going to be grounding the end there. So it looks like from the lengths of the wire, just pre-cut that we have from the shop here, that this actually is long enough. If you do need to strip the wires back, then you can use that wire stripper that we talked about at the beginning of the video. So this looks like it should be no problem here. Just kind of, mock laying it out, just making sure that we don't have any issues. And then we've got the second wire, which is a completely different kind of wire. Obviously, we got the braided wire. That's coming from the 3-way toggle switch. So the inner portion is going to go to this far lug over here, and then we're going to ground the outer portion there. Since I've got these wires isolated, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the tape that's on that wire. And this one takes a little bit more work, and we've got to kind of do a two-handed thing. So once I do that, I will get my tweezers out and make sure that we're kind of holding it to the pot as we add the solder. So I'll show you that now. Okay, so we're ready to install the braided wire from the switch. Again, that inner portion is going to go into the open lug there. Right now, it looks like we've got, just a little bit showing. That's probably enough. Some people will like to push it back, and they'll like to make sure there's enough to kind of hook around the pot, which isn't a bad idea either. So we'll go ahead and put that portion in to the open lug. And you can take the tweezers in here. I'll try to leave this so you can see what's going on. Take the tweezers in there and just kind of bend that wire around just so it's going to hold in place like so. And we're trying to shoot for that braided point to be over that pre-soldered area, or obviously if you have the pickup solder from the existing previous pickups that might have been in the guitar. If you're doing a new build or new pots, you have to obviously add that solder ahead of time before you put the braided on. It'll save you some time. I actually like to put a little bit of solder on the braid and then kind of hold it down and then reflow it a little bit. So I'll show you that. First things first though, we're going to go ahead and solder at the lug here, because I want to make sure that's holding before we set the rest of this. All right, so we got that all soldered. It looks like it's holding pretty good there. You want to make sure that we're heating the metal and adding the solder to the joint, making sure it looks shiny when we're done with it. We want it to be a really good solder joint. So now I'm going to add that solder to the back of this metal braided, just like that, because we kind of know just about where that's going to go. And again, I'm holding this metal braided, but you can't do it very long. It starts to heat up pretty fast. I just want to get a little bit of solder on the back. And then what we're going to do now is grab our tweezers. I've got my soldering iron ready to go. And just take that down to where it lays over that solder. We know we've got some solder on the back side, so that's actually going to help this whole job go a little faster. I've got my tweezers in there, and you'll see how I use these just to kind of hold it down at the end. So I've got the soldering iron on there. It's starting to heat everything up. I know there's solder on the pot. I know there's solder on the braid. So once I get a little bit of solder happening, melting right in that area, I'm just going to hold it over there until it starts to flow around where I pre-soldered. So as it goes there, we're going to get the solder to wrap around the braid and solder to both the pot and then over here to the other side, as well as just make sure we have good coverage. Make sure it's shiny. As long as it's touching a little bit, that's okay. It's a good idea to go ahead and make sure there's enough on there without going overboard, but make sure there's enough on there to actually hold it down and that it's not a weak connection to the back of the pot. So you may have to use some of the flux like we talked about before to get it to solder directly to the pot. Some of the cheaper pots, they're a little harder to solder to the back. But again, the ground is this whole entire outside of the braid, and so that's really what we're trying to do, is make sure we're grounding that connection, which is from the switch. So now I'll jump right into getting our 4-conductor that we prepped before, getting that in place. So we'll repeat the process, and the nice thing about this is you can kind of see how both systems would work, because sometimes you'll get a selector switch that has several, you might have plastic wires, or you might have braided wires, you might have a mix from some of the selector switches. So, and then when you do it yourself, you have to decide which method you want from the selector switch area. So we'll repeat that process here. I'll pull in that 4-conductor, again, following the color codes of our pickups here. I'm going to go ahead and put the soldering iron aside just so we can focus on getting that in there. If you like to use your hands, that's fine too. But the tweezers are very helpful, kind of feeding that fine wire through there. We're basically just going to make sure it's in the hole. Again, the nice thing is that looks like they left some room for us to set it in there. So that does help things quite a bit. So I've got the black wire in there. It's a little hard to see because you can see the wire kind of coming from the capacitor here, but the black wire is in the center lug from the neck pickup for the 50s style wiring. We'll kind of pull that to the side, and then I'll grab some solder, and we'll go ahead and do the same process. So again, repeating the steps and trying to get that joint nice and strong. And it looks like this was also insulated, kind of some protection on there. So we're going to come around like the underside of that insulation there. Get a good solder joint. So now we know that's a great joint. Everything looks really strong. I feel comfortable with going ahead and leaving this length like it has here. There's not a ton here hanging out in the cavity, so I'm comfortable with the way that it looks and the way that, there's enough slack that I can move things around, or should I want to do a push-pull in the future, it's good to leave that extra pickup wire as well. So we'll go ahead now, and for this is kind of almost feels like it should be a 3-hand kind of job, but we're going to go ahead and take that braid here. See if we can get it to cooperate. We'll push the braid over. We can use that existing solder pool, and then the backside of the tweezers work really, really well for when you finish getting that solder heated up and on the joint. You got to pull your iron away at some point, but this allows you to keep that down without burning your fingers. So a good set of tweezers is invaluable in pickup installs. And then I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit more. It didn't really look the way that I wanted it to here. So we'll reapply the tweezers. Make sure that we're heating the joint. And then our ground wires are installed. Yeah, looks good there. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we're kind of working, again, we're working with, you can probably make this even neater here if you're working without pre-existing solder joints on there. But this just worked kind of well with the connection and the lengths that we have here. So now we've got the neck pickup all wired up. Assuming all of our joints are good, we should be ready to rock on that end. So let's move over to the bridge pot and repeat that process. Okay, so before we hit the bridge pot, I'm gonna do a little bit of tidying up of the wires that we just did. So I like to kind of keep everything tucked away as best as possible. Not only does it look nicer, but it's just a cleaner route, and you can identify wires and troubleshoot if you need to a little bit easier. So I've got these 2 wires that we just finished up at the pot here. Basically what I'm going to do is kind of get them into a spot where I feel like they're out of the way, and they're, not going to mess with too much else. And then I'll just throw a piece of pickup tape or any other small tape on them just to keep them together. And I can kind of tuck them over to the side there to where it looks a little neater for the job. So I'll move the camera a little bit so we can get you to where you can see this bridge pickup. Back over here, we've got a couple things that we're up against now. Nothing too crazy, but again, thinking through making a route look tidy and dealing with wire length. So we've got this bridge wire that, I could pull this thing beyond the camera angle here. So it's a lot longer than it really needs to be, because it's pretty tight as is. And then I've got the pot here, and I probably got a good 6-7 inches of wire left on the end. So what I'm going to do is kind of meet in the middle. So I'm going to cut that about halfway, and then I'll strip the wires back and resolder the joints and show you that process. It'll just give us a little bit less, because I don't really want, this much extra wire in the cavity. That's a little bit extreme. So I'll cut it, you can pull it out here. I'll cut it to where I feel comfortable. Maybe it's almost to the end of the cavity, and then knowing that I'll be pushing it back and kind of tucking it away. So we're just cutting it with the regular cutters here. So I've got the end cut, and then we'll go back to our wire stripper. We didn't have to do that for the neck pickup, but we will go back to the wire stripper here. And then I think I'll pull the camera out so you can see that. Maybe we can do it here. Oh yeah, that'll work fine. So we knew that, roughly maybe 3/4 of an inch stripping length was fine for the wire here. This has got a little dial on it. You can set it to where it pinches correctly, and it'll pull that whole shield back on the 4 conductor. So you can see the shield showing there. All you have to do is squeeze it. It's very handy. So I'll set that aside. I'm gonna pull the shield off, and then usually I'll kind of give this a little twist. You can see the protective foil there on the outside. So then I'm left with my 4 conductor here. And probably what I'll do, just to show you prepping that, is I'm going to pull this wiring diagram over and actually kind of do it above that, so you can see. Maybe the camera will focus a little bit better on what's going on here. We'll pull it out a little bit too so you can see that. Great. Okay, again, we're not doing super over the top production here. We're just trying to show you how to get these things installed. So here we are left with the 4 conductor. We're going to untwist it. Basically, we're going to recreate the color code matching that we had before. So in the case of our pickups, the green and white are going to go together. Black is going to be the hot by itself. Red and bare are going to be the ground. The nice thing about this wire stripper as well is you can put actually all 4 of the wire colors in there and strip them at once. Just one quick squeeze. I kind of like to pair them up just to make sure, I'm stripping maybe 1/8 of an inch or so off there. So that's it, just a quick squeeze. Going over to the red wire and then the black hot wire. So I'll get the red one again. Looks like I missed that. There we go. We're all set with the wire lengths being stripped. If you feel more comfortable with the hot wire being a little bit longer, that's totally fine. Just kind of get used to it where you might want it. And then we'll take this lead, so the red and bare are our ground, and the green and the white are the finish of the coil. Again, we're going to have to tape that off because we're not doing any kind of coil splits on this particular guitar. So once those are kind of twisted together, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of solder to it. So I'm going to reach around the camera here, grab the soldering iron, and we'll put a little bit of solder on those connections because we want to make sure, obviously, that all those connections are nice and solid, that we don't have to deal with anything, we've got to solder them correctly at the end because we want to have good connections and all that. So it's like I'll grab my little length of solder here. Sometimes if you have a roll of solder, that's nice, but if you're doing a specific job, it's a good idea to kind of have little lengths of solder, so you can just grab them really quick and work specifically on an area that you're focusing on. So I'll put a little bit on each of those joints. If you want to, you can get some on the lead wire. Don't do a lot, because if you're working with a cavity that, or a pickup lug, or a ground point that doesn't have very much solder, or maybe has too much, it can get, you know, you're fitting a couple different wires in one spot. You're going to be running up against quite a bit of potential issues with that. So I'll move the paper, get all the lights set back up here for you. I'll zoom back in so we can focus again on the bridge pickup area. So our 4-conductor is prepped. We have the bridge pickup or the bridge selector switch wire here. So same deal with the braided. Those both feel like a pretty comfortable length to me. They can stretch out to almost through the cavity. And if we need to on a guitar like this, we can actually kind of tuck them back into the big long chamber that goes from here up to the switch. So you're not totally married to having a ton of wire in the back of the cavity. So from here, we'll kind of repeat that same process. Okay, so we've got the bridge pickup wires, the neck pickup wires all set. We're left with just this wire for the jack. So let me show you something I like to do with these guitars. Again, we talked about kind of the protection of the paper. So we're installing the jack. You can run it through the cavity on the side and then install it outside the guitar and put the plate back on. This particular one looks like it just kind of, it's got some room to be able to install the jack and then push it back in and then do the washer and the nut on the side. So I'll kind of show you that part there. So I think what I'm going to do on this one is actually just install it here and then put it back through and then tighten down the screw. So simple. I'm going to use my wiring diagram, just punch a hole in it and run that wire straight up through there. So that way we can kind of focus on the jack. We can even make sure that we're soldering it over the cavity space, and we're not going to risk like melting any finish or anything like that. It is helpful in some cases on doing the jack to also consider something like a helping hands or something like that. You know, you've got the kind of the claws to help hold on to the jack while you solder the other wires. But here's a way you can kind of tackle that. Again, we're going to focus on the inner wire first and then the outer wire second. So this will shift around a little bit while we're doing this. So looking at the jack here, we've got the ground right here. So you can see connects to the inner metal. The outer portion is going to be your hot. That's where this is going to go. Now we have to consider obviously that the cord itself is going to be plugged in here. We don't want to run this straight across the opening for the cord. So I like to think of it as kind of like hugging the outside here. So yeah, so we've got the inner portion of the wire here, and then we'll make sure that the braid itself is going to touch to the outside on this end. So this is where something like maybe a mini clamp or something could be helpful here. But as long as we have this one started, it will at least give us an anchor point to work off of. So I'm going to see if I can get it to cooperate here and show you the soldering. You want a good metal to metal contact with all your parts. So we'll just touch that up there because you may have to add some more solder. Again, I don't have 3 hands here to show this, so I'm kind of just putting it together to give you an idea of where to go with that. So then again, the outer braid is going to be here. We know that we're not going to go through this with the braid because the braid is too big for one of these jacks. So if you like, you can actually go and take your solder and do kind of the same process that we did on the pot. You can add some to the outside of the ground lug, fill up that hole, and then you don't even have to have this close necessarily, but we're going to add some to the bottom of the metal braid as well. So now we have 2 different points that are ready to be contacted and soldered together. You can kind of see over on the side here. just like that. So then from here, we're going to probably want to use our tweezers again to hold that joint together. Even honestly, like a set of mini pliers or something like that may be actually easier for you to kind of open it up and then hold it together. So I'll get some solder on the iron, and we'll take my tweezers. I'll hold on to this portion of the jack because I want to make sure I can control what's going on here. Making sure we have good flow. Everything looks nice there, and we've got a good clean solder joint on the ground side of the jack. So we'll go ahead and reinstall that jack, and we will do some testing to see if our wiring worked. All right, so we're back over here by the amp. You can do this with a meter, but sometimes we like to audio test things and make sure we're not hearing anything weird, everything's functioning as it should. So what you can do from here is use a simple screwdriver test, we call it. You're going to tap the pole pieces of the pickups. Don't tap the covers, don't scratch it or anything like that. Set it into the position that you want to test. So here we are at the neck pickup. Got a good, nice tap sound out of that. We'll turn the volume knob to make sure that it's actually functioning as it is. You can actually hear, as well as when we turn that tone knob, you're going to be able to hear it get a little muddier sounding even as you tap. So you're going to be able to test the functionality. So we're going into the middle position, make sure both pickups work. Bridge position, volume's off, doesn't make a sound. It's a little muddier as you turn it there. So it looks like we did a good job on our wiring, and everything is ready to string up and start playing.